Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Network Observability in Modern Retail with Softcat and Thousand Eyes. Today, we have two speakers who I'd like to introduce, our very own Tom Rowley here at Softcat and Chris Wark from Thousand Eyes. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A tool you should see on the Zoom navigation menu. And all being well, as part of the agenda, we'll have some time at the end to go through your questions and get some answers to all of them. Please note a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides will be shared with you following the event, and an on-demand version of this event will also be live on our Softcat website within the next week. If you have any further questions following the webinar, please speak with your Softcat account manager, or if you don't have one, please contact me. My name's Ebo Barnes. You can contact me on eboba@softcat.com. I'll now pass over to Tom to start the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ebo, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to start by just running us through quickly the agenda of what we're going to be covering on today's call. So we're going to be kicking things off by telling a little bit of a story about how we move from monitoring to observability to level set everyone here today. We're then going to move into and take a little bit more of a focused approach as to what does observability actually mean in modern retail. We're then going to break out into a little bit of a fireside chat with myself and Chris, and then move into how can we actually get started on this observability journey in retail before closing out today's session, as Evo said, with a bit of an audience Q&A. Now, as a bit of a pre-warner, we will be at one point today doing a little bit of a poll. Don't worry, it is anonymous, but keep your eyes peeled so that you can interact throughout this webinar. So to kick things off today, we're going to start by going into a little bit of a story, as I said, about observability. We look at the old world, and for me, old world, technology moves quickly. So 5 years-ish ago, we operated in a world where we had a large on-premise data center presence. We had users who would come into the office. We had a wide area network that was typically connecting our sites together by an MPLS with a single internet breakout. We fast forward now to the modern world, and things have drastically changed. We've got rapid adoption of SaaS, cloud, and hybrid working. And this has meant that our users and devices are now a dynamic state. The same goes for our applications, whether they're in a public cloud, on-premise, in a colo environment, and even IoT starting to come into the picture. Having our users and devices and our applications and resources in this dynamic state is starting to create an infinite amount of ways that these two things can connect to one another. The internet is a crucial part of that. And absolutely, it has increased the network's complexity. In summary, what we need to observe has now absolutely changed. At Softcat, in the world of observability, we start by talking through outcomes. I believe an outcome-driven approach is the best approach we can take with this type of technology. There are three main outcomes that can be targeted by this technology. That is visibility, operational efficiency, or user and customer experience. How we achieve these outcomes can be slightly different depending on the technology area that we're talking about on the left-hand side of the screen. Whether this is hybrid workspace, networking and connectivity, hybrid platforms, or cybersecurity. And we'll explore this a little bit further later in this call. Outcomes is part of this, but I think it's also really important we talk about what is a successful approach that we see our customers adopting when looking at this technology. For me, this all starts with those outcomes, defining which outcome or outcomes are being targeted. After we've defined the outcome that we're goaling for here, it's then about identifying what are the supporting observability use cases that we can use to drive that outcome. Once we start to establish some of those use cases, we can then start to define exactly what is it in the environment that we really care about monitoring. Finally, it's then about mapping those observability use cases against the technology capability that we need to meet them. This includes looking at existing tooling that you may have already invested in. It could be areas where you don't have visibility for today and that you need to procure something else to fill that gap. Only at that point do I believe that then we can start to look at vendors who might meet the requirements that you're looking for, whether that is to drive costs down, to improve our operational efficiency. So let's take a bit of a deeper dive into each of these technology areas, starting with hybrid workspace. Hybrid workspace observability is all about looking into an environment from the endpoint up, whether this is that you're trying to look and understand user productivity, local application performance on a device, or even digital experience. Next up is cybersecurity. And some of you on the call might be thinking, cybersecurity for observability, we've done that for a long time. You're absolutely right. And you don't see a lot of solutions in the market that are touting themselves as we are observability for cybersecurity, but there's good reason for that. It's that old rhetoric. You can't secure what you can't see. Cyber has been doing this for a really long time, whether that's a vulnerability management solution that's looking at where are all the vulnerabilities in my environment and prioritizing which ones we need to action first, or even compliance. Next up, hybrid platforms. And this is more focused at that application and infrastructure layer, whether that's looking at application performance, how that relates to server performance, or even mobile applications. And finally, the best to last, of course, I would say that is networking and connectivity. It is the glue that pulls all of our environment together, whether it's wireless networks, LAN, WAN, cloud, data center networks, or connectivity itself. So how did we get here? Monitoring is absolutely not new. It's been around for over 30 years. What we've noticed, though, over that last 30 years is a steady increase in the amount of monitoring tools that are residing in our customers' environments. Whether that started with the Windows team getting a server monitoring solution, the network team getting their own then monitoring solution, suddenly we're moving out to cloud and the cloud team go, great, but we also need a specific monitoring solution for that environment because it all works a little bit different. Or even marketing teams buying point of sale experience monitoring tools to get a better understanding of their customers. For me, this creates two problems. Problem one, it creates a culture of proving innocence. For any of you who are aligned to network teams on the call, you will be familiar with the network getting blamed typically first for a lot of issues. If the network team's screen of monitoring is saying everything's green, the application team's screen saying everything's also green, it creates conflict. It creates challenge around finding what is the root cause analysis and who is responsible for fixing it. And the second point kind of feeds that first point. It's about having too many sources of truth to gain a true understanding of what is happening in that environment at that point in time. So let's see how that plays out today. Here we've got 5 teams. Your teams might have different names. Let's start with this infrastructure team. They've got an alert. They're starting to have performance issues. The first people they're going to is the network. Have we changed the network configuration? Network team? No. Network looks fine. Have you tried the application team? In the meantime, the infrastructure team is getting more and more tickets. Application team. We updated the point of sale app last week. And for the sake of this example, let's say that they introduced video into that point of sale app. Maybe it needs more resource. Back to the infrastructure team. We'll allocate some more resource tonight and we'll do some testing. Now, we all know we can do thorough testing and we hope that we get on the next day and we don't have a load of tickets coming up. We also know that isn't always the case. So let's say we get to the next day. Network team are now starting to get alerts because the app's taking up too much traffic on the network. Workspace team, they're starting to get alerts because customers and staff are starting to complain about transaction delays. The cyber team is starting to get an alert, even though there might not be an actual threat there, they're starting to see different traffic coming out of this application. The problem here is they're not informed. And what do we notice about this? There's lots of questions. There's not lots of informing. There's lots of bouncing around to try and understand what's the problem, how do we fix it, who's responsible for it. So how did we get here? I mentioned at the start of the call, there's been rapid adoption of SaaS, cloud, hybrid working, and also IoT coming into our worlds. This has left us now in these distributed islands of technologies, where individual teams within IT are becoming siloed in their approach to monitoring. Essentially, they've all got their own monitoring tool stacks. So what needs to change? For me, moving from monitoring to observability is about moving from looking at silos to looking at an ecosystem as an environment. Looking at and understanding where each of these islands have key interdependencies. Can I get to a point where I understand I've got a business critical application, how that links to the server that it's hosted on, its performance, how that links to the data center network that traffic's going to traverse, the wide area network it's going over, the local area network it's coming back down, the wireless network it's getting broadcast over, and ultimately what the experience is of that user or device on the other end. Now, I wish I could stand here today and say I've got a silver bullet for everyone, and this is going to fix all of your problems. Unfortunately, that isn't the case, and especially when we're talking to larger organizations. What we are finding is that organizations are starting to adopt an observability toolset. This can still mean consolidating the amount of observability tools or monitoring tools that you've got today to provide as near a unified view out to the IT team and all of the teams within it as possible. Let's play that out again. In this situation, we've got observability tooling implemented. The infrastructure team still have an alert, but they are provisioning more resource following the point of sale application update, as they've already predicted using their observability tooling that they're going to start hitting capacity. They are informing that application team. Great, they can start to keep an eye on performance. They're also going to look to speak to the network team. By doing some synthetic testing, sending emulated requests across that environment, that's telling them that the network team is probably going to have to add some more bandwidth to support this application post-update. Great. Network team, thanks for the heads up. They're going to get to work on that now. Workspace team is starting to see operational efficiency improving. And although the cyber team are still going to get an alert here because that's different traffic coming out of that application, the point is they're informed and they can understand why they're getting that alert. So how does all of this stuff work? The first part for me is moving from reactive monitoring to proactive observability. There's two functions that I'll call out here. One is real user monitoring. Can I monitor real user or device traffic all the way from source to destination across every network that it will traverse? The second is synthetic monitoring, that ability to send fake requests over an environment, pretending to be a user or device. There's many different applications for this type of functionality. That might be after we've made some changes, typically in the middle of the night. Rather than waiting to the next day to see if a load of support tickets come in, can we actually synthetically produce traffic across the environment to represent everyone coming online the next day, trying to access their resources and see if any issues occur? The next bit here for me is moving that from proactive to predictive observability. And this is, yes, where those words of AI and ML start to come into the picture of this technology. But I do believe it's for good reason. When you look at AI and ML, what are they brilliant at? They're brilliant at looking at large sets of data, analyzing them, understanding where there's patterns and trends to provide meaningful insights. So the way that observability works here is it's gathering telemetry from all parts of an environment. This is typically in the form of metrics, traces, and logs. You may also hear events and the word MELT as an acronym used for this technology. All of this telemetry is combined together. It is correlated. Again, surfacing those trends, those patterns, those insights. But as I said earlier, in some of the enterprise organizations we work with, it is pretty much impossible for them to ever get down to one single tool to monitor everything. So we still need something that multiple monitoring tools, even if it's between 3 and 5, to feed into a unified presentation layer that can present the current state of that environment out to all IT teams to give them a mutual understanding. So that's the story of observability and how we've kind of got to where we are today. Now we're going to focus a little bit more into what does observability mean in retail. And this is where I'm going to have Chris Warp from Thousand Eyes, who's kindly joining us today, to come and answer a few questions that I've had prepped for this call. So I'm just going to take the screen share down. Hi, Chris.
Morning, Tom.
Morning. Thank you for joining us. So observability in retail. I think a really good place to start with this is, why is network observability specifically crucial for the retail sector?
So I think, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And thanks to you and the audience for taking the time on this. So let me try and keep relatively succinct on this one. So, specifically in retail, it's a very fast moving industry, right? So pretty much every organization is taking their digital journey to the next level. Retail is, probably as time critical as some of the other high end markets. The complexity comes from an increasing reliance on these digital technologies, which you very eloquently kind of given us a view of in your early summary or synopsis view. And that's for just the operations, but it's for the customer interaction, it's for supply chain management, and pretty much every part of their business. So that's a massive change, right? So that's got to be factored in. The tech stacks that are being used by these organizations, and then whether that's consumer retail, whether it's finance retail, et cetera, those tech stacks are increasing in complexity because it's not just beyond what the customer's deploying, but it's also what's happening within the dependencies that they're relying on, the SaaS providers or the as a service providers, the cloud providers, et cetera. And then there's obviously that need with that added complexity. Another thing is to be able to identify and solve those issues quickly. And your point around moving from monitoring to observability, from a reactive to a proactive, is never been more important. And I think from your side, Tom, you had some kind of interesting industry statistics around this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when we say network complexity is increasing. I think it's important to bring to the audience some insights, right, from their industry specifically. I read a report recently, and to that point around increasing complexity in networks, 91% of retail organizations are experiencing that absolutely today. And again, that is a result of that adoption of IoT, SaaS, cloud networking, all coming into their environments. Okay, so we've established that. Let's move on to challenges. So, great technology. What are the main challenges currently faced with actually just monitoring network environments in the retail sector today, Chris?
Yeah, and again, especially in retail, what we're seeing, what I will add actually to your previous comment, by the way, is retail is probably one of the fastest growing sectors for our business. So that kind of says everything we need to know, that it's not just us saying this, it's the customers, moving with their feet and their wallets towards us, which is always good news. But specifically, the challenges that we're being asked to really help them with is, an example would be, high traffic volume. So, no big news, but ultimately retail has some very unique events like seasonal changes, the Black Fridays, holiday periods, etc., or betting events, sports events that will create high traffic volume from time to time. In addition, we've got that complexity we referenced. Increasingly we're hearing from CIOs, CISOs, CTOs, etc., that the number of tools and platforms and that they're relying on is just amplified, and multi-cloud is not making that any simpler. Data security concerns, one of the big things that we have is within retail there's a massive personal information, so we want to be able to make sure that not only can the retail customer in question not just handle that sensitive data, but also make sure it's going in the right way. So data sovereignty is key, GDPR, and a number of other compliance. There's quite a lot of heavy regulation in some of these retail customers. So that's a very, very key element of it. We've also got to cater for the legacy systems. So let's not forget that. We all get very excited by shiny new, but actually a lot of our customers are using legacy systems and workloads that have been in their data centers for many, many, many years, and it's next to impossible to move away from that. So they have to adapt. So we've got to make sure that even if they're somewhat outdated, that they can be brought in. So that's a challenge that we help them address. And then the maintenance burden. We're talking about monitoring tools and preparing data. So that influx of information really is adding a massive burden in, how do we prepare that data? How do we present that data? What do we need? What do we not need? And start being able to reduce the cost of infrastructure to look after that data.
Yeah, I'd agree. And yeah, all of this impacts network operations teams, different ways. I did warn you all that we're going to be doing a poll at some point, and this is that time. So we wanted to ask you all a question and share in an anonymous way what the answers are. That question is, which is the main challenge that you're currently facing with monitoring network environments today, out of those few that Chris just covered? And just a quick reminder, that is high traffic volumes, scale up, scale down with the holiday period, the growing complexity of IT infrastructure, data security concerns, whether that's maintaining sovereignty of your data or just simply understanding where it's traversing, having to look after and manage those legacy systems and monitor them, or even the maintenance burden that just comes with managing a network as a whole. So we wanted to pop that up as a quick question, and we will share the responses shortly. Great, we've actually had some come in here already, and hopefully that's all coming up on your screen. So legacy systems, Chris, seems to be the most popular answer, closely followed by complexity of IT infrastructure. Let's focus in on the biggest one there, legacy systems. I mean, you've talked about that as a challenge. If we just zoom into how can ThousandEyes and the solution that you provide help with that challenge specifically?
Yeah, and bluntly, not surprised. I think that's a massive point with organizations that want to protect, previous investments, right, and sweat them out to the end of their life cycles. So, where do we come in on that from a ThousandEyes perspective? Massive integration capability across not just existing network infrastructure, and a lot of that, of course, will have a Cisco badge on it, which we're pleased to see, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a Cisco badge on it. So things like, customers that have got Catalyst or Meraki type switches and routers, ThousandEyes will coexist in that environment. In addition, there is an element of ThousandEyes that also enables integration into ITSM systems, for example, like ServiceNow, but also other APM and network monitoring. So it's actually very complementary, and we can adapt the feed to where it is. So it really will slot in to the strategy of the customer. And in fact, that's actually one of the key benefits that we see out of that. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I'd agree as well. And I think when we look at legacy systems, it can be hard sometimes to even do application performance monitoring on some of those legacy systems. What I do find is that organizations look to actually collect that telemetry and monitor it at the network layer, because that starts to remove some of the pain and some of the challenges that comes with it. And also that second point, I think it's really important just to reinforce there, Chris, around, yes, ThousandEyes is absolutely part of Cisco. Yes, you will probably get some deeper and better integrations and experiences if you're putting ThousandEyes with Cisco, but at the same time, it is absolutely an agnostic technology, and
Correct,
you can sit on any vendor, any platform.
Yep.
Awesome. So I think it's always valuable to ask in these sessions, what if we do nothing? What happens if we do nothing? So what is that impact? What's the impact of organizations in retail not implementing observability?
Yeah, another great question. And again, in the presence of time, I'll keep the answers relatively brief. But let's be very clear, right? Not doing anything isn't an option because that doesn't happen. But, should that be the case, there is going to be consequences in terms of operational disruption. There's going to be probably even more significant issues in terms of customer dissatisfaction, because ultimately that's where the business runs. That's the lifeblood of the business. Operational costs are going to go up through a number of different reasons, which I'll touch on in a second. The security vulnerabilities we talked about will increase. And then there's going to be the delay of just trying to work out what on earth is happening if we are now still depending on those, third parties. So from a disruptions perspective, outages, slowdowns, and failures, and I want to emphasize, this isn't just about outages. This is actually about understanding if the environment is performing and being able to cope with what we're asking it to do. You need to know if that's not the case. So you need that alert. So that operational disruption, as an example, dissatisfaction, right? You upset customers. Guess what? They walk, they go to your competitors. So that's really not a good place to be. Operational costs, I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with hitting the big red button and Sev1 or P1 incidents. They're very disruptive. They're very costly. They can be very time consuming as well. So, and not only that, they'll take resource away from existing projects and stop those teams being productive. Security. Good.
I'd agree with that, Chris. No, just to add to that, I think, especially when we look at the retail sector, there is a very direct comparison between downtime and loss in revenues. The other bit I was going to add there, you talked about kind of detection and resolution delays. Some interesting stats around that. There's a lot of focus on what does observability improve. It improves that mean time to knowing where an issue is and how do we fix it. I saw another really interesting stat on that, specific to networks. A lot of people focus on that total time to remediate. 70% on average of that time is spent on the mean time to knowing where the issue is. So if we can reduce that mean time to knowing, we're going to have a big impact on what that total time to remediate is. Further to that, 55% of customers or retail organizations, they take around 30 minutes to actually identify an issue in the first place. There's then typically another 30 minutes to get it resolved. So the damage that 1 hour of downtime can do is just crazy. Okay, awesome. Well, we've talked a little bit about some of the challenges there. Let's try and take the conversation a bit more positive, shall we? Let's talk about some of the benefits and what are some of those benefits of organizations and retail adopting observability? And to make this a little bit more real for our audience, Chris, I wanted to ask if you could just talk towards a real life organization. We don't have to name names, but I think we'll just start to bring this to life a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So there's a couple of instances in mind, but the one I'll focus on for now is an organization that's both business to consumer and business to trade. We're going to focus primarily on the business to consumer environment. So it's a retail, high street and online presence. And quite simply, they were adapting and trying to get to where, we've been talking about to this point. The net result of getting to a point where we're solving the challenges we just discussed was, you talked about mean time to knowledge. We also talk about mean time to resolution, which is a very, very clear metric for us. So for this particular organization, within excess of 2.5 million registered online customers, obviously the customer base is bigger than that, we reduced their incident resolution time by in excess of 50%. So P1 through to P3, P4. Wow. So that was massive for them. And then there was a bunch of costs and metrics that went with it. Now, forgive me, they've asked me not to actually give the true numbers, but they've given us the percentages, so we'll respect that. So operational cost was down by 11% at the end of the first year of implementation. And that's pretty staggering, right? Because this is not an insignificant organization. The revenue per head for staff increased just shy of 2%.
Wow.
The revenue per customer increased on that 2.6 registered online sellers, not every customer, but their registered customers, just under 4% per head, right? They got an ROI on the initial 1,000 I spend and that project within 7 months with a 300% plus ROI, and the monthly benefit for them worked out in terms of operational reduction around about $12,000 a month. So, you know, there are massive benefits there, and side benefits as well. I know I'm rattling on a little bit, but side benefits as well were that actually their customer acquisition count started increasing as well.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think there's different ways different retail organizations can approach this. For me, one of those key things is just driving that operational efficiency, especially when we're working at such scale. And as you kind of talked towards a little bit there, just simply improving network reliability and performance can have such an impact on customer experience. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now towards how can retailers actually get started with their observability journey. I'm just going to share my screen again here. So there's kind of three options that we want to share with you all today. Option one is a session that we can run as Softcat with your aligned NetSec specialist. This would be an observability discovery workshop. This is where we can help talk to you in a bit more detail and bespoke to you, defining what are those observability outcomes that you're targeting. We can help you start to identify some of those supporting observability use cases and start to map some of those use cases against technology requirements and also vendor capabilities in the market, while also understanding what are the existing tools that you've already invested in. Number two is something I'm quite excited about from a geeky standpoint. But Chris, could you talk to us a little bit about the retail observability capture the flag?
Yeah, so again, I'll try and keep this very concise. So capture the flag is kind of a fun way of learning, right? So let's be clear, this is really targeted at individuals that have got a good basic network understanding. What we want those individuals to do that come to the workshops, which can either be at one of our premises within Cisco or at Softcat, is to bring a laptop, and to help with one of the outcomes is just to bring a little bit of an insight into some of the challenges around, you know, number of incidents, incident type, time spent resolving them, and, you know, how many a month, right? Because that helps us start bringing this value assessment. So during the event, which is about 2.5 hours, be a full introduction to what we do. That'll be tailored very much for that retail business environment, from retail finance to consumer to B2B, B2C, etc. Then we'll take a real view on the lab access, or hands-on within that, with a capture the flag kind of gamified format. 2 or 3 missions, debriefs after each of those missions. And then for 20 minutes or so, 20 minutes to half an hour, we're going to do very customer specific value assessment surveys, right? To see actually what the initial impact would look like. Some of those metrics I shared around the retailer earlier, that's kind of what we want to come out. And then at the end, just some Q&A. So that's what the agenda would look like. And we're targeting really network administrators, engineers, network managers, that kind of persona, right? System engineers.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And yeah, I think it's exciting that we can start to put some numbers towards what the return on investment might actually look for.
Yeah.
Some of this stuff together. And then finally, number 3 here is just simply observability consultancy. We appreciate that everyone's on a different stage of their monitoring and observability journey. That might be that you're right at the start of that and you want to do a gap analysis engagement to understand, where have I got gaps in my visibility? What can my tools do today? Where have I got functional overlap? It could be starting to define what your observability strategy is. It might be that you want Softcat to work alongside you to assess all the vendors on the market against what your requirements are in a Moscow style engagement. Could also just be that you've got the monitoring tools that you need and you'd like some professional services to come and help configure them in a better way. So that starts to bring us towards the closing part of today's session, which is where we move into the audience Q&A, and me and Chris start to sweat a little bit, as this is the unprepared part, Chris. So, Ebo, I'm going to pass back over to you to see if we've had any interesting questions come in from the audience over the duration of the session.
Thank you. We've got 4 questions, so I want to try and get through them all. So the first one, and I'll leave it up to you to decide who's going to answer each of these. If we invest in this technology in terms of money and resource, how do we measure ROI?
Okay, let me take that one. I'm going to keep this really quick and simple. So I'm going to go back to the mean time to resolution point. And Tom made a comment around you can't secure what you can't see. So we kind of go on a mantra of you can't fix what you can't see. So with Thousand Eyes delivering that extended visibility across all of the environments that you own and don't own, one of the key metrics that customers cite Thousand Eyes for is that quick root cause identification, because that's usually one of the most timely parts of fixing a P1. So what does that mean? To put a metric, and it's very general, and it might not necessarily be specific to one account, Gartner talk about $96,000 as an average cost per hour of downtime across industry. So there we go. That would be, I mean, if we do it right, we probably pay for the platform in the first incident.
And there's also that ROI piece that you can do even before you start going into this tech, right?
There you go.
The stuff that comes out of that capture the flag piece.
Yeah, 100%.
The next one I've got is, how is a solution like this licensed?
Oh, Chris, I'll take this one.
Yeah.
So Thousand Eyes specifically slices on the number of tests that you're going to run across that environment. Now, this is also a little bit of a differentiator in my view from the other observability players in the market. A lot of observability vendors will license based on ingest, and a bit like the world of SIEM, we haven't quite decided, have we yet, still what we call that, but log management. In that world of log management, it's all based on ingest, and anyone who's been into that world will know costs do spiral up and up and up. So I actually think this approach, it works really well for the organizations we work with. The other bit I'll add to that as well is Thousand Eyes being part of Cisco also means that if you've got that existing Cisco infrastructure, you can start to wrap that into enterprise agreements with Cisco. There's certain benefits that you get with that, which is things like true forward. So before you come up to your renewal, you can essentially burst the amount of tests, for example, in Thousand Eyes, that you'd be able to do over a given period of time. That, for me, linking that back to retail, your organizations do scale up and scale down, like we said with the holiday seasons. So it might be a nice little link there of how you can start to bring those two worlds together.
Yeah.
The next one I've got is, do I still need my existing or other network monitoring tools? Is this a silver bullet for observability?
Oh, Chris, both probably have a go at this. Go on, I'll let you go first.
All right, thank you. Silver bullet? No, I think Tom made that comment earlier. So sadly not. We're getting closer as an industry, but right now there is not. So specifically to the question, do I still need my existing or network monitoring tools? Yes and no. So simply, as I mentioned earlier, Thousand Eyes will integrate and work with existing network performance monitoring tools, application performance monitoring tools, ITSM, log management, etc., etc., etc. So that whole monitoring observability stack, Thousand Eyes will coexist with, all right? Because actually what we're doing is we are creating the telemetry from the environments primarily that traditionally have not been able to be monitored. And we enable that ingestion of data that we talked about earlier to go into those existing platforms. So whether you want, I mean, single pane of glass is somewhat overused, but you know, one-touch screens is kind of where we're getting to. So can we put it into something like an ITSM? Absolutely. Will it roll into our data, roll into things like Splunk? Absolutely. So yes and no, you don't need to necessarily get rid of any monitoring tools. What I would say, however, is increasingly as business goes cloud native, there is an argument that says as legacy monitoring tools amortize, they can be retired and actually start using a more cloud native type technology like Thousand Eyes for their expansive observability. But that's a much wider question. So the answer is yeah, it will coexist.
Okay. There's a bit I'd probably add into that as well, which I go back to those outcomes and use cases. There isn't, I'd agree with Chris, there isn't a silver bullet for this stuff. What I would say is the tools that you choose depend on the outcomes and use cases that you're looking to apply. That doesn't mean that you might need one of every type of tool. It depends on your environment. An organization born in the cloud compared to an organization that's grown out of an on-site data center are completely different in their setups. And for me, it always comes back to that. It's about viewing this as an ecosystem of technology. Can I get something like Thousand Eyes working really closely with an application performance monitoring solution to then give me a unified view of that entire environment, for example? So yeah, I think the short answer is no. I think both given probably a slightly longer answer as well.
Yeah.
The questions are coming in thick and fast, actually. Some more on top of what we've got. So
Yeah,
I'll
I've
keep
seen,
them
yeah.
coming for the time being. So can we manage non-Cisco devices through the Thousand Eyes platform?
Yeah,
Chris,
good
that sounds
question.
like a you question, that.
Yeah, that's a common question. Whether it's got a Cisco badge on it anyway. So let me be clear. Can we deliver visibility across devices? Yes, we can. What we call device layer, that is not really the focus, because you've probably got a bunch of network performance monitoring tools that do that for you. Think of Thousand Eyes, as Tom explained earlier on, through the concepts of synthetics. So very simple, and I'll try and keep this very brief. It's agent-based in terms of how we create the synthetics. The platform is consumption, and what we do is we generate synthetic sessions. Okay, so it's to applications. What we do is we measure the whole digital supply chain, everything, every router, every switch, every hop, every provider, every metric to the source, which could be, for example, Salesforce.com SaaS application or Microsoft 365 with Word, Excel, Teams, etc. inside it. That's what we're monitoring, right? So we're looking for degradation in that connection or outage in that connection. We're not necessarily monitoring the device per se. We're monitoring the digital experience. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. The next one I've got, I'm just going to slightly tailor it so it's a bit broader. So it's how efficiently can we, no, sorry. How different is this to other observability platform tools?
Yeah, I can take that. So I'll build on actually a little bit what Chris said there. Observability, let's just take a step back. Observability has absolutely become a buzzword in our industry.
Yeah.
There's lots of vendors picking it up, and there's lots of vendors putting it on the front of their solution. Fortunately or unfortunately, it's my job to kind of go and have a look at that and question that a little bit. So you do have vendors out there who are broad. They will cover lots of different areas of observability. One area that I'd say that not a lot of them cover, to be honest, not many at all, is this area of internet performance monitoring, IPM. It's starting to come out as a term now more from Gartner, but can I monitor the internet? That's a really simple question, but also quite a challenging one to answer. Thousand Eyes can go further than that because they can go through that entire network path, hop by hop. And something maybe we haven't talked as much about on this call, that also starts to give you that visibility. When I say monitor the internet, it's also about monitoring the supply chain, monitoring the networks that you don't have control of. That could be an ISP network that has a routing table error that they don't know about, but it's impacting your business. The fact that you can monitor that and be proactive about raising a ticket on that organization is a real benefit. So how's it different? It's very focused on the network and absolutely brilliant when it comes to monitoring the internet itself. That's partly thanks to some of the unique capabilities in Thousand Eyes around things like cloud vantage points, where they get extremely deep visibility and rich visibility of internet-based traffic.
Could I add some color to that? I'm aware we're sort of heading towards the end, but let me just add a bit of color to that in a real live example. It's they are now one of our biggest customers, a retail finance organization. So I won't bore you with all of the preamble to the situation, but very simply, P1, War Room, the bank in question was in a world of pain. They'd been on P1 situation for 6 hours. They still hadn't found root cause. We were actually in a situation on proof of value, looking at another application. We were asked to point our technology at that particular issue for that particular application. The application, by the way, was the retail banking portal was not working, which is pretty critical. And I'll come to that in a second. Simply, what Thousand Eyes did very quickly by generating a synthetic session, i.e. a synthetic Chris Wart, to go in, get into my bank, do whatever it was I wanted to do, we quickly identified two things. Number one of the upstream ISPs was not performing as they should be. I think it was in excess of something like 50% packet loss, right? Which is not good. Number two, there was some corrupt web pages on the CDN. So a lot of the cache stuff that the bank was using for their online pages was corrupt and wasn't loading. So they simply didn't have a command that says, if this little element, by the way, it was a logo, if that logo doesn't load the rest of the page anyway. What was happening is the customer was getting an error, right? Doesn't work. Why is that important, right? So hopefully that illustrates what Thousand Eyes can do. So it's gone from internet all the way through to the environment and out to other third parties that also have critical implication into loading pages and giving the customer session. What did we do? Well, 6 hours in, they were apparently 2 hours away from a $20 million EU regulatory charge. And we found it in 5 minutes. So that's what gave the root cause down. Did we fix it in 5 minutes? No, but what we did is we pointed the right resources at the right area and provided evidence to help them begin the triage.
It's right back to that bit, isn't it, Chris? It's the mean time to knowing where that issue is, who's responsible for fixing it, and getting back to that state of remediation. I am conscious on time.
Yeah, Evo, sorry, I wanted just to illustrate that, but thank you.
It's all good. Evo, any more questions?
Oh, it's one from me, so I'm going to aim it at you, Chris. What is one question we can leave the audience with to ask themselves and their organisation?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's probably the most difficult one I've been asked. Right. So I think for the audience, and by the way, thanks very much for the questions that have come in. It's been, really, really good to see the engagement. So thank you very much for that. I would say to the audience from this event, just consider and understand what is the most costly application to your business to have downtime. Where is it? Is it in your data center? Is it in a cloud? Is it hybrid? And what role does the network play in observing that? And can you do it? Right? That would be. And if the answer is negative to any of those points, I would say come back to us here at Softcat, and we'll see if we can help you with a solution.
Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you to everyone for joining and staying right till the end. We hope we provided you with some extra insight, and I'm sure you can agree both our speakers have been great. As I said earlier, if you have any more questions, please do get in contact with your Softcat account manager, or if you don't have anyone, please contact me directly at eboba@softcat.com. Any questions that we've left unanswered, we will be getting back to you also with, so please don't feel like we didn't cover everything for you. We'll be sending out a copy of the recording and the slides, and you'll be able to watch it back on demand once it's on the Softcat website. And there will also be a post-webinar survey that will pop up after the event, so you can let us know how you found the content. We'd love to get your feedback. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Tom and Chris for speaking today on the webinar, and we hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheerio.